All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank y'all so much for joining us for our fall virtual birding seminar. We hope that if you had joined us, if this is your first time to join us, we're thrilled. And if you have joined us previously for one of our other virtual birding seminars or in the past at one of our in-person programs, thank you so much for being a part of the Birding with Extension family. And to everyone who is now joining us, welcome, you're a part of the family. Sorry if you don't like us. So, really quick introductions before we get kicked off. So, part of our Birding with Extension team is on tonight. So, Janie Miller, just give us a good wave-o. There you go. She is one of our Birding with Extension program coordinators, and we appreciate all the time she volunteers and helps to in those capacity roles. Rainey Bingham, she is the Real County Extension agent. All the way from Leakey, Texas, and they just learned to bird, was just in Leakey, so had a great successful time there. And Liz, I don't ever say your last, and it says Emily Grant, but
it does.
I don't ever say your last name right, so you can say
it. So my name is Liz Tidwell. I am the Birding with Extension co-program coordinator. Does that sound right?
Well, you're the specialist. You tell them your specialist title.
So I'm a wildlife program specialist with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. But I help with, obviously, Birding with Extension, hence why I'm here.
So, excited to get kicked off tonight. As y'all saw, rolling through those slides, our welcome slides, that first of all, Birding with the Border, which is happening the first weekend of May, registration is open. And because of all of y'all's support tonight and participation, we are pleased to announce that we have been able to offer another $500 for Rio Diablo Birding Camp scholarship. And that will go to continue to make the camp cost affordable for our young birders. So we capped the cost at $1,000. And then youth are eligible to apply for those $500 scholarships to help that 8-day experience be even more affordable. So tax, title, and license, participating in our virtual birding seminars, and thank you to our speakers who make these possible, help make that even more accessible for our youth. So Liz, kick us off for our fall virtual birding seminar.
Yes, yay! So our first speaker this evening is going to be Chad Whitco. And Chad is with the Audubon Society. He is the senior coordinator avian biologist. Is that right, Chad? Does that sound right? He is going to speak with us today about the Migratory Bird Initiative, as well as a program that Audubon Society has. But I guess, Chad, whenever you are ready, you can take the reins.
Okay, well, thank you so much for the warm introduction. I'll share my screen, so bear with me as that comes up. Okay, is that showing?
Oh, it still says it's trying to share it. It says you're started sharing. There we go.
Is that showing now?
Yes.
Okay. Of course, that didn't go as planned.
We were discussing this beforehand. It never does.
Never goes to plan. All right. So yeah, let me just get my screen cleared up here. So thank you everyone for joining tonight. Thank you, Liz, and everyone else for having me. So I'm coming to you this evening from southern Vermont, but I'm representing the National Audubon Society, and in particular, the Migratory Bird Initiative. So Migratory Bird Initiative is kind of a new part of National Audubon over the last few years. Some folks probably haven't had a chance to hear about us, so I'm going to talk a little bit about our work tonight. And as was mentioned about our program, the Bird Migration Explorer. So tonight's presentation is going to cover a few things. The first, as I mentioned, is an overview of the Migratory Bird Initiative, or as you'll hear me refer to it in short as MBI. I'm also going to talk to you this evening about the Bird Migration Explorer. We'll do an overview and as much time as there is at the end of the talk after Q&A, or I should say before Q&A allows, I'll do a demo of the Explorer to kind of orient everybody on what it is and how to use it and feel comfortable with it. So I just want to first state something that's probably pretty obvious, and that is the fact that migratory birds connect places like Texas, connect places like Vermont, to faraway places across the hemisphere and across the world. And that context will kind of frame a lot of what I'm talking about this evening. The fact that, places like Texas, like Vermont, birds are migrating vast distances. They face a lot of challenges, but there's a lot of wonder and joy that happens through our migratory birds. And I believe you'll see why the Migratory Bird Initiative was founded as a result of what these birds are facing after a few minutes of tonight's talk. And also maybe you'll see from the Explorer how much joy and wonder there is in our migratory birds and what they experience. So first of all, the Migratory Bird Initiative, I just want to state that MBI currently uses the best available migration science to protect birds in the places they need across their full annual life cycles. So why is this needed? Why is MBI even around as part of Audubon, an organization that's been doing great work for a lot of years? Well, that's because birds, particularly migratory birds, are being lost at an alarming rate. So some of you may be familiar with the seminal paper in 2019 in Science from Rosenberg et al., detailing the loss of nearly 30% of our bird populations from the landscape, nearly 3 billion birds, as that paper detailed. This is in the last 50 years. This is within the lifetime for probably most of the folks on tonight's call. So our birds are declining at a rapid rate. Now, aside from that report, which is really a keystone for a lot of work that's being done today, our own work on survival by degrees, which looked at climate change, detailed some nearly 389 species of birds on the brink of extinction or some type of massive range shift due to climate change if things aren't being enacted upon sometime soon. So as I said, our birds are being lost at an alarming rate, nearly 3 billion in 50 years. And, 3/4 of our bird species in the US and Canada are migratory. And the science that I was talking about details that 1 out of every 4 birds, migratory birds in the US and North America as a whole, have been lost since 1970 from our landscape. That's nearly 2.5 billion birds. The climate science that we have as well shows that the future isn't looking bright for many of these. And that's an important framing for why MBI is around in the first place. Obviously, these birds need some type of change to happen. So what is it about birds and why do we study them? Well, birds tell us about the health of our environment. Our migratory birds obviously tell us about the environment across vast distances. And these birds are the proverbial canary in the coal mine. They're very rapid to respond to environmental change. They're wonderful ecosystem indicators. And these are organisms that scientists will study to learn about the health of our environment kind of in almost real time. So as this quote says here, if you take care of the birds, you take care of most of the big problems in the world. And that's something that we feel to be very true here at Audubon and here at MBI. So by protecting birds in the places they need, things like clean air, clean water, wild spaces. We also protect these places that people and other wildlife need as well. So what's good for the birds is also good for us. But more than half of our migratory bird species that we see in our communities spend more than half of the year outside of the US. We often have a biased feeling that these are our birds, and that's okay to feel, but the truth is these birds are spending a lot of time outside of our backyards or our favorite birding haunts. And these are a shared resource. For some species, such as the Swainson's hawk here, we're detailing from the Explorer a map here showing their migrations out of the American West down to the Pampas of Argentina. These are shared resources, these are shared experiences, and in order to protect migratory birds, we have to work together across the hemisphere. We often say that it takes a village to raise a child. Well, we feel it takes a hemisphere to protect our birds. And that's how we have to protect them across their entire full annual life cycle across the hemisphere. So how do we do this? Well, it's important to understand that advances in migration science and technology help us understand bird migration better, more intuitively, more finely detailed to achieve more impactful conservation. Now, part of this stems from newer and newer technologies, smaller technologies that allow us to track small birds, such as this red-eyed vireo. Also, new analyses allow us to better understand the data that we're getting in. And all of this kind of helps paint a better picture of what's happening. Now, the good news is that there's new studies published, it seems like nearly every day. Part of my job for MBI is to discover some of these studies, and it's certainly true that in my inbox weekly, there's new studies being put out about people tracking birds and the insights that they're revealing. So the data synthesis that I mentioned is revealing new insights. So here we have an example from the Explorer showing a black-polled warbler and a conservation challenge map, which combines weekly bird distributions and abundance with a footprint of human activities and environmental change. Now, this shows where, when, and how extensively birds are exposed to these threats throughout the year. And this kind of data helps give us valuable information about how we're possibly impacting the birds that we care and love. So, by visualizing the scale of the problem, this helps us to understand the scale of the solution. This is really important in a lot of the work that we do, is being able to take this data and visualize it to help us better understand what's actually happening. So Audubon's Migratory Bird Initiative was launched in the fall of 2018, so 5 years now, with a vision of securing the future of migratory birds in the Western Hemisphere. Now, to do this, we'll work on 4 fronts. The first is identifying the places birds need to thrive across the Americas, protecting the places that matter most, not just for individual species, but for whole suites of species, reducing threats, and engaging people in the wonder migration, including presentations like tonight. So this is our vision to kind of move the needle forward for MBI. Now, to accomplish this, MBI consolidates millions of data shared by hundreds of scientists and institutions, including just general birders, if they use eBird, to reveal the most complete understanding of where, when, and how we need to act across the hemisphere to protect our migratory birds. Now, it's not just us that's part of this. We also have extraordinary partnerships among science, conservation, and technology organizations, including hundreds of scientists, institutions, and agencies. On the screen right now, you'll see a matrix kind of logos. The top 9 are our founding partners for the Bird Migration Explorer. And then the bottom 3 are partners we had on the technology side that helped make the Explorer the reality that it is today. So what kind of data are we taking in? So I'm going to show you the various types of data that MBI is taking in to make our work possible. And I will say that our work is not just products like the Bird Migration Explorer. It is also conservation assessments, working with folks to understand the places to protect. We put out publications every year. So it's not just the visualizations that we do, but it's also real science that we do with these data. So as I go across the various data types that we bring in, I also want to point out the kind of icons above the data type. So here we have banding, and you have kind of 2 red dots with a black line. And as we go through, those lines and curves that you see represent whether the data give us direct connections, help show us an actual pathway, and the thickness of the line helps indicate more or less how precise that data can be. So banding data, which many of you are familiar with, of course, from banding stations, is kind of like giving us an A and a B component of where birds are. So they're banded in point A. Later on, that bird is recaptured, and that band is red. And now we know that bird has gone from point A to point B. We don't know exactly the pathways that they took, but we do know that the bird went from one location to another. And then those locations are very finite because we know where those locations are. The other type of data that we've taken in are the use of genetic data. The Bird Genoscape Project was wonderful in sharing a lot of their research with us. So here we have a Wilson's warbler, which is, I think, one of the flagstone species for their work. And you can see that that data is similar in the types of connections it has, but it's a little less precise. We also use automated radio telemetry data, which includes things like MODIS, very famously. A lot of people will think that MODIS can necessarily give you the exact pathways. If there's a dense array of towers, that's probably somewhat possible, but really what it is just a series of pings that go from the bird, migrating past these MODIS stations. And so we can form kind of an inferred pathway, and it's fairly precise. Next, we use data from satellites, including GPS, PTT. These are actually very detailed pathways, so we can know where the birds went. And sometimes that data is very precise, hence the very thin line. And finally, we take in light level geolocator data. These are small tags used on small birds like this black-polled warbler. Essentially, they just read light levels, and those light levels can help us triangulate on the Earth where the bird is. Unfortunately, it is not very precise, but nevertheless, it does still serve a great purpose. So those are the general types of technologies and kind of tracking components that we take into our work. And what this has done is we've consolidated data for 458 species across these various kind of types of data. And those data that I showed kind of get binned up into different things. So tracking data, thinking about the high precision data, and even light level geolocators, we have over 9,000 individual birds that have been tracked of 187 species that have come into our initiative. Connectivity data, thinking about those A and B connection points. We have over 4 million connection points that have been made across all these different types of data types for some 386 species. So a good portion of our total species list for MBI. And then finally, we have a lot of eBird status and abundance data, which helps infer our ranges on the range maps, as well as BirdLife International ranges. And those range maps are kind of consolidated together into a novel product, which we vet, experts on our team, myself included, to make them some of the most accurate range maps that are available today. Now, we'll also show in the Explorer some threats and conservation maps. And these are brought in through 19 hemispheric layers, which are provided by a lot of freely available data. And then also we have conservation sites that were provided by Audubon and founding partners. So that is an overview of the Migratory Bird Initiative in a very quick nutshell. And now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Bird Migration Explorer and show you some of the three main kind of map types that we have for you to see. So first off, I want to say that it's its first of its kind interactive digital platform. It combines all those different data types into one place, which is really unique. No other place really has that kind of consolidation of all those disparate data types. It's free. It's available in English and in Spanish on exploreaves.org. And it was designed for two general audiences in mind: birders and bird curious, which I imagine everybody on the call tonight would fall under, as well as conservation practitioners and advocates. Also suspect many on this call would fall under that bucket as well. So the purpose is to engage people in the wonder migration, raise awareness to the broad scale of challenges that birds face, show that actions locally can have a hemispheric impact, and to instill a sense of connection and responsibility. So what are the main parts of our Bird Migration Explorer? So this first page that you're seeing here is an example of our species migration maps. This is a map showing Whimbrel migration pathways. And these maps enhance our understanding of the full annual cycle to improve conservation efforts. It's really important to see sometimes how these birds are migrating and really to visualize where they're coming, where they're going, and the places that they're kind of intersecting with along the way. So we'll take a good look at what one of those maps looks like soon. Next are our location connection maps, which show us how places and people are connected across the Americas through our shared migratory birds. In this example here, you can see how Denali National Park is kind of being used as an example to show how birds from that part of the world travel all the way through a wide range of North America into the northern tier of South America. So these are our location connection maps, which are really, really fun to play with. And then finally, our conservation challenge maps, which can provide data and maps to inform planning and policy. So these kind of combine weekly maps of bird distribution and abundance with the footprint, as I said earlier, of conservation challenges. So this shows us when and where and how extensively birds are intersecting with human activities and kind of threats that we've put onto the landscape. It doesn't necessarily show the impact, and that's one thing that's important to know. So before I go on to the live demo, here are some basic ways that you can help if you're interested with our work at MBI. First and foremost is if you're a birder, please, please, please continue to use eBird. That data finds its way to organizations and projects such as us. Also, many other researchers use that data. If you use eBird, your data is in our Explorer, so thank you so much. Volunteer the banding station if you can. It's really important to keep those running. And if you happen to know researchers, perhaps through your institutions, a friend of a family, member that's a researcher that's doing tracking data, please let them know about our work and see if we might be a good match for them. Next, you can use the Explorer. It's really great for advocating for conservation issues. There's a lot of ways to share out what you're finding to make good kind of advocacy points in emails or presentations. Share the Explorer with your friends. And of course, if you are using it, tell us how you're using it. You can either contact me or you can contact us at migratorybirds@audubon.org. And then finally, feel free to connect with us, take action, sign up, join the Audubon flock. And on the Explorer, you can check out some of our learning resource sections as well. So there's a vast way that you can help contribute to our work, even if you aren't a tracking data holder. And so I'm just going to leave this on the screen real quick, take a drink of water, and then get into the demo. So just real quick, here's our email. Here is the web link for the Bird Migration Explorer in English, and then here it is in Spanish. So, okay. So are we still seeing the screen? Can you see the Explorer?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So here we are at the Bird Migration Explorer. You can type in explore.audubon.org. You can type in birdmigrationexplorer.org. You can Google it. All those things will lead you to the website here. And so when you first come, what you're first seeing here is our migration journeys map. So this is the map for all the data that we've been able to pull together that fit our criteria so far and display this in one single map. And so when you come here, you're going to see a few panels. I'll explain all of this as we go through. You'll also see that there's some things grayed out, which look like they're inaccessible, but I'll show you how that works in just a second. So the first thing I want to orient you to is that the Audubon logo in the top left is our home page kind of button. This will take you back to this page no matter where you are. And then those three map types that I showed you, bird species, locations, conservation challenges, those can be accessed via the top bar through any part of the Explorer, or while you're here, also these red buttons on the left. Okay, so looking at the map, you'll see that things are grayed out. I'm going to click on the map, and a pop-up comes up to ask you if you want to load the interactive map. You don't have to. Perhaps your connection's not really strong, but if you have a good connection and you want to explore a little bit more deeply, you can load that map. And what this is doing is this is piping in all that data that we had collected. And you can see in this map layers panel in the top right that each of the colors that you see represent a different kind of taxonomic grouping of birds. And so these groupings can be turned on and off depending upon whatever your interests may be. Here I'm leaving raptors. Perhaps I'm really interested in raptor migration, or you can turn all of them on. You can also zoom in to whatever area you're interested in, say South Texas. And then you're going to see a lot of lines popping up. These are all the tracks for the individual birds that we have in our Explorer. Now, it looks like a giant plate of spaghetti, and you might say, this is too much, I'm overwhelmed, and that's fine. There's ways to view this in a more refined way. But what this is really here for is to kind of show you the massive amounts of data that we've collected, and also to kind of highlight something that's really kind of fun to see, which is some of these migratory pathways that are shared between birds. Now, we did this thing where we took all these pathways and we removed the base map, and still you can see the outlines of the coast, you can see the Rocky Mountains, you can see the Florida Peninsula. All these features are kind of lit up by the migrations of our birds that are following these major physiological features on the planet. Now, as you scroll along, you're going to see there's a whole bunch of things popping up. These are individual tracks that your cursor is picking up, in this case, ovenbird, and it's showing that it's a light level geolocator track. So this bird, obviously, this is its more or less its pathway. As I mentioned, light level geolocators have a really wide, swath of uncertainty. So you can see that there's a whole range where we think that bird could be in, given the width of that track, versus something here using Doppler satellite, which is much more precise. So these are just fun ways that you can kind of explore through. And here I'm on tundra swan. If I were to click this now, it would take me to the tundra swan map. But we're going to go up and go to bird species. We're going to explore in a little bit of a different way. So when this first loads, you're going to see that we have a few featured species, which we picked because they have cool maps. And then also the 458 species that are in this version of the Explorer. You can sort these alphabetically, you can sort them taxonomically, and then there's all kinds of ways that you can sort and filter through. You can filter through by taxonomic grouping, by your location, what birds are in your area, what technologies were used, what data technologies. Perhaps conservation statistics are of interest to you. What's their climate vulnerability? What's their population size? Or perhaps our conservation challenges. So which birds, perhaps are threatened by a certain type of conservation challenge, or I should say, are impacted or intersect with those challenges. And so, you can filter this down in a large number of ways. I will point out that you'll see an icon that says tracked. This is just showing that we have precise tracking data, more than banding data, for that particular species on its map. The one thing I want to caution about is just because a species, say American crow, doesn't have a tracked icon, doesn't mean that it hasn't been tracked by a researcher. It just means that we don't have any tracking data on the platform. Not every researcher has shared their data with us yet, obviously, for a variety of reasons. So sometimes it means that perhaps there's no tracking data, no science has ever been conducted in that way. Other times it just means that we weren't able to acquire that data. So I'll start by showing one of my favorite maps, that of the broad-winged hawk. Now, you guys in Texas should probably be familiar with broad-winged hawk migration. It's a very wonderful place to see these birds, like places like Corpus Christi. So you can see as this map is moving through, you can see the tracked birds for the data that we've acquired coming in, funneling through our maps. So I'm going to pause the time slider on the bottom. And I'll start by saying that when the time slider starts, it'll always start in the week of the year that you are in at that time. So as it starts, the birds are starting more or less where they are in real time. These, of course, data from past tracking efforts, but it's a representation of time across the calendar year. The time slider bar on the bottom, you can pause it. You can move it back and forth through time, however you want, whatever direction you want. You can go as slow as you want. You don't have to let it run at the speed it runs. And you can also expand it out to cover certain periods of time. So in this case, this is covering the whole spring migration season. So across the whole spring migration, here's the range that broad-winged hawks will cover across the Western Hemisphere. So that's how the slider works. I want to point out that the map layers on the upper right, just like the home map where you can turn things on and off, is similar here. So you can see that the yellow orbs are representing high precision data. So in this case, GPS or PTT data. Low precision data is represented by these purple orbs. Gaps in tracking data, I'll explain that on the next map. And then journeys of a tracked bird. So as the gray swath here that I just turned on, you'll see these kind of like ghosted outlines. That's kind of the footprint of all the tracks that these birds have gone through. And then finally, for the key, you'll see the abundance of the species. This is relative abundance through eBird data. So all your eBird sightings kind of put these in. We put them into hexagons. So kind of we bin them up on the landscape level. And then, of course, the range, the seasonal ranges. So in this case, the summer ranges and the winter ranges. So I'll just play this out for a second and just kind of point out some of the things that you might see. So obviously you can see that during the fall, broad-winged hawks are migrating out of North America, streaming through, going through Veracruz, river raptors down in South America. And of course, they're migrating back in the spring. I'll point out that, one of the wonderful things about this is that when the technology is finally displayed, you can kind of see that in some areas, some of these birds might be falling outside of known ranges in South America. And we believe these are kind of novel insights as to where these birds are wintering. So this is a really great way, if you're really interested in these, whatever species you're interested in, to learn more about the individual pathways these birds are taking. You can learn a lot about their migration ecology in this way. You can learn how, your area kind of connects to other areas through these birds. And it's really important, if you're going to kind of take on some advocacy efforts, how this might be able to help you out. So the bottom right here, very important to point out, this is our data source panel. So this is dynamic for all the maps that you see. So in this case, it's showing you all the components of this map, including the broad-winged hawk migration studies. So these are properly cited. We go through great care to make sure that the researchers are happy with how their data are cited. A lot of them come out of publications. So that's always present if you want to be able to contact these folks yourself or understand what data are comprising that. So you can do that there. You can also share out our maps. So there's this little share icon in the bottom right. It's kind of the box with the up arrow. And it allows you to copy a link, so you can directly copy this broad-winged hawk map and share it out, through email, text, however you want. There's a little option box here that if you check it includes map specifics. So if you want to show only high precision data zoomed in at a certain point of the map, get it where you want it, tick that box, and it'll share and send it out as you choose. So finally, on the left, you're going to just see kind of our information panel here. You have conservation statistics. We have related stories. So, here's an article that I authored on broad-winged hawk migration and some research that's being done. And then there's other access to different types of maps and related links. So it's kind of an information-packed panel on the left as well. So showing what that kind of looks like, I'm going to go back and we're going to show another species map quickly before we move on. And this is bobolink. This is another, wonderful migrant that we have here in North America, long distance migrant. And you can see that the colors are now the purple orbs, so not just the yellow. These are the data that were from light level geolocators. They're less precise. You'll see that, during certain parts of the year, across certain parts of the range, as they come across the equator, um, the data because it's light level data in certain parts of the world at certain times of the year, it's not very, we're not able to really infer much from that. So we kind of have to say we don't really know where the birds are. That's what the gap means in that case. Doesn't mean the birds disappeared or anything, weird. It just means that the data type doesn't allow us to really pinpoint where those birds are at that time of year. So again, all the same components as the broadwing hawk map, just a different data type that I wanted to familiarize you all with. So really wonderful way to kind of see how these beautiful blackbirds kind of migrate through. So the second type of maps that I showed was the location maps. So you click on locations at top or from the home screen, and you'll see that, again, we have some featured locations pulled up, just like we had featured birds. These are places that kind of make really interesting maps that we think were worth checking out. Of course, you can click near me if you want to show something near where you are. I'm just going to put in Houston, Texas to show this map, because I know a lot of you are coming from Texas tonight. So here's the location map for Houston, Texas. So on the panel on the left, you're going to see a whole bunch of information regarding locations by country, species, and birds. So this is essentially saying that when you're in any one of these hexagonal kind of, areas, so in this case, Houston proper, Houston proper connects to, say, Canada across 64 species of birds, of which over 4,000 are represented. Now, you might say, well, there's more species that go to Canada, that go through Houston than this. This is just birds that we have data for. So tracking data, banding data in this case as well, genetic data. So this is just showing what species through that technologies, those data types connect these places. So, you can choose secondary locations on the map. Obviously, the darker the purple, the more, numbers of species that connect those locations to, in this case, Houston. So here I clicked randomly, came up with Mount Carroll, Illinois, and you can see that there's 25 birds that have been tagged, banded, tracked, that connect Mount Carroll, Illinois to Houston, Texas. So 25 birds of 11 species. When you do this, you can see that Houston, Texas connects to these conservation sites. So here we have some area conservation sites near Mount Carroll, Illinois. So what's really cool about this map is not only just seeing like what birds have been tracked and how they connect to various points around the hemisphere. It's really to help to kind of open your mind up a little bit about some of the conservation efforts and advocacy that's happening. We often hear, wherever we live, about some of the conservation that's needed in far-flung places across North America, the globe even. And we might say, well, I've never been there. I can't really understand what the needs are, or how does that impact me? Well, this is one way to kind of understand like the efforts that are happening in other parts of the hemisphere, impact some of the birds that you see, you love, you know very intimately from your area. So this is a really great way to kind of dive in and see how your location connects to other locations through the hemisphere through birds. And again, the data providers panel in the bottom right, again, shows you all of the data that's kind of making up this map. And finally, I'm going to show you our conservation challenges map. As I showed, as I mentioned earlier, these are kind of showing the footprint of select human activities and environmental changes across the hemisphere. Birds are these canaries in the coal mine, right? So by mapping where and when and how extensively they're kind of exposed to these challenges, we can better understand what they're facing and how to explore the solutions that maybe can benefit birds and people the most. So the challenges are kind of broken up into these kind of big buckets, things like residential, commercial development, agriculture and aquaculture, et cetera. And you'll see that there's kind of like sub areas under each of these. Now, we have a lot of data in the back end that kind of informs these maps. I think it's like 15,000 records gleaned from publications detailing how birds are impacted by some type of challenge or threat. Some of those are direct kind of literature results. Others are kind of extrapolated, wisely, I would say, across the different groups. So if something's impacting one species, in some cases we can ascertain it's probably impacting kind of like sister species in the same genus. So that kind of informs us. So these are all kind of driven by science. Not all of them, all the challenges have made their way into the Explorer because some of them, unfortunately, aren't easily mapped. So these are kind of the big bucket ones that kind of are able to be mapped and have kind of like real impact. Now, I do want to just say that you might notice I'm carefully using the word conservation challenge and not threats at times. And that's because with some of these, threat isn't always necessarily the right word. Because for some species, if we think about kind of forestry might be viewed as a threat for some species, absolutely negative impacts. For other species, it's kind of an opportunity for good management. So we look at it as kind of a conservation challenge. So I'm going to show you an example here. I've just kind of been scrolling down and we're in the pollution section. So I'm going to look up light pollution. Now, light pollution in cities like Houston is a major deal. We all have heard, I would suspect by now, kind of the massive building collision stuff that happened in Chicago earlier this year. So light pollution is a big deal for our migratory species. And so here, when you click on the challenge, you see kind of an overview of where light pollution is on the landscape across the Western Hemisphere. And as you can see, except for like the far-flung most regions where it's kind of less, a large area of these of the Western Hemisphere are impacted by light pollution. Look at the eastern half of North America. It's just inundated with this kind of challenge. So here we have 306 species exposed to this challenge. We have kind of a long list here that you can go through. And so I'll pick one that I think kind of exemplifies this pretty well, if I didn't scroll past it already. So look at black pole warbler. So here again, we have a time slider that's going through. These hexagons kind of represent two things. The larger the dot, the more abundant the species is in that kind of hexagon. And then the darker the color, the more exposure to that challenge. And not only do you see this on the landscape, you can also see on the bottom, we have a histogram here that I'll pause, and you can see that during spring migration, not surprising, right? As birds are coming up through North America, they're hitting kind of the eastern part of the US. There's a lot of cities, so that light pollution challenge is very prevalent. So the spring and the fall, these are the big areas here for this particular challenge for this species. So this kind of gives you an understanding. You can kind of like delve into some of these issues and see how species that you may be working with, you may be really concerned about, you may be interested in, might be impacted by various challenges. So finally, I'll just say on the left.
But we love.
Oh,
Sorry. Yes.
Sorry, there's some audio coming through, and I just I didn't know if that was directed at me. So on the left, there's these 8 conservation challenges for this species, black pole warbler. So you can click on another one and see. In this case, this is wind turbines. You can see it's kind of a very low challenge for this species. So I know I'm just about time for questions. So I'll just kind of wrap up and say that, here's the Bird Migration Explorer kind of as a whole. There's these 3 main components that you can delve into. There is a ton of information here that I think can, answer your inquisitive, kind of questions. They can help you with advocacy and policy efforts, conservation efforts on a local scale. They're great educational tools that are in here for, really students of all ages. At Audubon, we just did some work with Audubon Adventures, looking at how the Explorer can help teach young kids about migration. So we think it's a really wonderful platform that is kind of like one feature of all the work we're doing at MBI. And we hope that you guys will come to this, use it to your heart's content. And of course, as you do, let us know what you think. Let us know what works for you. Let us know what you think would be nice additions, and we'll go from there. And I'll just say that, this was launched in September of 2022, so last year. We've had, I think, 1 or 2 updates already. We have another update coming after the new year. So more data and updated data will be coming in. We're constantly refreshing it as best we can. And I'll also add that within the last year, this is now available on mobile. So previously, you'd have to go to a browser on like your computer, your tablet, something like that. We now have that available to use as a mobile browser option. So if you use Safari on your iPhone or Chrome on an Android device, you can go here. The options are just kind of pared down a little bit to make it more mobile friendly. It is not an app. We don't have any apps in any app stores or anything like that, but it is mobile available on whatever kind of mobile device you have, as well as online through standard means. So I think that's all I have for now. If Liz or anyone else wants to help moderate any questions, I'm happy to answer any in the time that we have.
Yeah, so Chad, thank you so much. I played around with this program whenever I had first contacted you, because I'd never heard of this before, and I was playing around with it. I'm so glad you did a tutorial, because I was kind of wandering around this aimlessly, like,
Yeah.
well, there's so much information that is available at your fingertips, and I had no idea it was there. But first off, thank you so much, Chad, for coming on and presenting.
Sure.
But we have a couple questions. So one person asked, does the Bird Migration Explorer automatically have all USGS BBL banding data, or do banding stations need to opt in or send information?
Sure, that's a great question. And I will answer that, but I do want to say one thing first, which your comment about using it and feeling like you're wandering aimlessly. I want to just mention one thing to that point before I forget, which is if you see here on the screen, if I'm still sharing it properly.
You are, yes.
Yeah, so when you're at the home page, there's this 3 kind of like line menu in the top right, which is referred to as like, I think, the hamburger menu. There's an About the Bird Migration Explorer kind of like link here, and it takes you to this back page, which has all the information about how it's built, who our partners were, all the institutions, all the studies, like 80 pages worth of that stuff. But when you go to the learning resources on the far right, at the top, it talks about kind of like some instructional videos and things like that. So we have some tutorials on YouTube for anyone that's like, I'm not going to remember what Chad said. This is too much. We have some kind of overview videos on YouTube. I think it's like how to use the Bird Migration Explorer. If you just Google that, YouTube it, there's a lovely video that kind of works through a lot of what I did already. So just wanted to point that out as a resource. Now, as far as the data coming in from USGS and the Bird Banding Lab, that data, none of the data just kind of automatically pipes into this. So we have to kind of collect the data. In my case, working with tracking data experts, that data has to come in. We have to manage that data. We have to format that data for our product. It's very labor intensive. Additionally, data we get from Cornell, data we get from USGS, that's a similar thing. So also MODIS, we have MODIS data from Birds Canada. That data is kind of sent to us in like a package. And then that data is worked through and then put through kind of like the data processing pipeline that my colleagues are so wonderful at, have all the scripts for and push it through. But that doesn't just come in. That has to be manually kind of like worked with USGS, receive it and go through. And as far as like, do stations have to kind of like opt in or anything like that? No, if the data is contributed to, the Bird Banding Lab, we have an agreement with the Bird Banding Lab that kind of gives that data to us. So I hope that helps answer the question.
Sorry, it helps if I unmute myself to talk.
Yeah.
So John had a question. He says, how do we identify a species by Doppler radar?
Oh, that's actually a good question for probably one of my former colleagues who's now at kind of Colorado State University doing radar work. I don't know a ton about this because we don't really work with that data type for the work that we do. I know that it's the signatures that are put onto radar like that. I don't know that there's a great way to pinpoint it down to exact species. Like I don't know that they can look at that data and say, these 10 dots, or whatever they call the data type, when it's visualized, these are Wilson's warblers and these are bay-breasted and these are that. But I think that they are able to work through some of it, based on the signatures. I know they can identify swallow roosts based on kind of like the signatures of how they come and go on radar. I think there's maybe even some work that gets it down into maybe size class. I'm honestly not really sure, so I'm going to refrain from trying to make up an answer. But my understanding is it's not very precise yet, but there may be some insights that are more general.
Okay, so we have a question from Ellen. She says, wow, you're such a good presenter. I'm so excited. Can we contribute our bird sighting info directly to Explorer, or is eBird the way to go?
Yeah, eBird's the way to go. I get emails all the time through the Migratory Birds email where people want to share their sightings. And we just don't really work with the data in that way. And it's best to go through eBird anyway. Like there's so many great reasons to contribute to eBird. So yeah, definitely if you have sightings, contribute them to eBird. They help us out. They help other researchers. If you've never done it before, I certainly advise, I shouldn't say advise, I certainly suggest or encourage everybody to do it. It's a great opportunity to contribute to some really good science.
Okay, so John asked, he says, in Brazos County, Texas, there are a few eBird listings for mourning warbler, but they and mourning dove represent a remarkably high proportion of birds that hit brightly lit buildings on the Texas A&M campus. Can you comment on limitations of eBird?
So I don't know if I'm going to speak to the question exactly. But yeah, I mean, eBird has a lot of limitations. It's imprecise to some level. There's biases that are put into it. But like, I think this is very generally speaking, so I'm sorry if I'm not answering it specifically, but like any good kind of like data source, the folks who are working with it, I think know those limitations, and work with them to the best of their ability without over inferring data. One example I can kind of give, which is a different thing altogether, but perhaps maybe parallel, is working with eBird data. eBird has these kind of status and trend maps, which help form a big portion of our range maps that we use for the Explorer. So myself and Jeff LeBaron, who's not in MBI, but he's an Audubon colleague on the national science team along with me. He's the director of the Christmas bird count program nationally. We kind of serve as kind of like experts on reviewing all the maps for MBI. So all 458 maps, we had to put eyes on and kind of guide what worked and what didn't make sense. And one of the things that we noticed with eBird data is how vagrants would often drive up the maps that we see in a sense. So, at the start of the slide, right, the presentation, I had a scissor-tail flycatcher on the presentation's kind of lead image. That's a species you guys know very well. Here, I'm in New England and New York, like that's a bird that only rarely ever comes up here as a vagrant. Well, a couple of years ago, there was one in upstate New York that a lot of people saw. My partner, for one, she was visiting somebody out there and she saw that very bird. And when you look at the status and trend data and the maps, there's a little kind of like glowing pin for scissor-tail flycatcher in upstate New York. just the same as it would be in any other part of its range at that time of year, that suddenly we have to contend with things like that, because it's the feeling of, okay, well, this is a vagrant. Why is it represented in eBird so high? Well, it's because so many people went to see it. So they're driving up kind of like the number of checklists, the number of observations for that bird. And then we have to kind of work with the eBird data that we get. And so that's one limitation, is that the data shows you stuff, but sometimes it shows you stuff that you have to kind of work through. So in that case, we had to say, well, that's not really the range of the bird. That's just an example of a bird being a vagrant. In other cases, we have to look at that data, and we might be seeing new range changes or expansions in range. And so we have to kind of work through those and make those decisions as we do. So I know it's maybe not answering your question exactly. It's a bit of a tangent, but yes, eBird has limitations just like anything else.
So yeah, so John did go on to say, he said eBird sightings, are mostly during the daylight hours. Much of migration is at night. So, they don't necessarily, you don't pick up on that. So it sounds like you did kind of answer his question. So I don't think you can speak to this question too much. We did have one question. Oh, where did it go?
Ask Ellen's question. Sorry, I'm jumping.
Oh,
I like this one.
Sorry. Okay. So Ellen asked, how do eruptions like the flamingos this year affect the data?
Oh, that's a really good question. I was actually not part of this because this happened like right when I was first hired. One of the things that we had to do as a team is kind of come up with this metric of what is a migratory bird. And you would be surprised at like the different definitions of what a migratory bird might be, what the different lists would be. We worked with partners at the Migratory Connectivity Project, actually looking at the status of tracking data for North American migrants. And when we first started working together, we actually had two different lists. Like we didn't both come in with the same exact list of migratory species in North America. And of course, there's all types of things like altitudinal migrants, short distance migrants. But then you get into things like eruptions and, things like that, you have to kind of really be careful about. Is it a true migration? Is it something else? There's a few species where you might be surprised they're included or not included as a result. With American flamingo, we don't have that on our migratory, like it's not on our list for MBI species. So for that case, even though there's all kinds of sightings for that bird all over the place now, we just won't have to deal with it in a sense. But it's a good question. It's more or less the question of what is a migratory bird and what do you do when birds like snowy owls or finches show up erupting, and how do we classify them? And it's kind of on a species by species basis, really.
Okay, well, so Emily answered the one question I was going to refer to you, but so apparently we have a lot of Ellens on. I think this is the first time we've had multiple Ellens on. But so Ellen asked, oh, we just jumped. And this kind of goes along with eruptions, but have you noticed that eruptions affect future range expansion?
Oh, another wonderful question. I don't know that we have any work that's been done on that from our side of things. It's kind of like an age-old question, right? When it comes to birds that show up out of range, like what's the cause of it? Is it something where birds are kind of, I'm losing the word that I want to use, but prospecting, are birds prospecting? And in some cases that might be true. But yeah, that's a good question. But we haven't, as a organization or initiative, I should say, we haven't looked at that specifically.
Okay, well, this is gonna be our last question, and then we're gonna move on to our next speaker. But I will put Chad's contact info in the chat. So if y'all feel free to email him with any of the questions that we did not get to. So do the maps take into account species that migrate, but also have resident populations, same places that other individuals of this species migrate?
Sure. I mean, all these questions are just absolutely fantastic. yeah, that's the thing, right? With these species, like we have migrants and there's all kinds of migration strategies. We have some birds that are complete migrants. We have birds that are partial migrants, which basically details like, does range overlap with other individuals of that species or kind of like clear the area. Some birds have migrant populations and resident populations. So everything that you see on our maps, if you think about the species maps with the tracking data moving, all that movement you see from like the orbs, the yellow, the purple, those are individual birds. So those birds are clearly migrating. We have thresholds for the data that the bird has to migrate a certain distance in order for us to count it, but not too far, which might indicate that the data is, something's wrong, not weird angles, all that. So all that's to say is that the data you see for the moving dots, those are actual data. The abundance data that you see with eBird, I didn't really point this out perhaps long enough, but those hexagons with the brown dots, if you look at them, they kind of shift up and down. And it's not individual birds that we're tracking with that. What that is you have kind of a collection of checklists and observations that contribute to that hexagon. So, say here in Vermont where I am, it should that map should be kind of devoid of like killdeer observations, right? But then kind of like in March, when the ground starts thawing out and killdeer are kind of coming up and kind of creeping up following that line, more and more people submit killdeer checklists through the summer and into the fall. And what happens is there's more checklists, so that abundance kind of increases. So what we do is we kind of take a snapshot of the landscape and divide it up into 52 weeks. And when you kind of put it all together and work through those weeks, basically it's like an increase in the abundance of checklists for an area for more birds. And then we visualize that. So then you are seeing those birds migrating. But so that inherently that's showing that there's increase in birds. So those birds are coming from somewhere, but it doesn't take into effect, or account that in some places birds are there year round. You just have to kind of maybe know a little bit about the biology of the species. So Canada geese, you might say, well, there's Canada geese in this place all winter, but the dot gets bigger, at a different time of year in fall or whatever. And it's showing that birds are there year round or persisting, but then migrants are coming through as well.
Perfect. Well, I know we've had more questions pop up, but we do need to move on to our next speaker. Like I said, I put Chad's contact info in the chat. So like I said, feel free to reach out to him. I'm sure he'd be more than happy to answer y'all's questions. But Chad, once again, I greatly appreciate you coming on and speaking about the Migrating Bird Initiative.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just say, I know it's a fire hose of information in a short period of time, but anybody's welcome to contact me, and I'm happy to follow up as time allows.
Perfect. Well, you enjoy the rest of your evening, Chad. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Bye, everyone.